Hello, and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, and you may want to listen with a visual aid or two. If you are interested in tarot cards, then I suggest you pull out a deck of Rider Waite tarot cards. And Rider Waite is a very easy to find deck of tarot cards. You may also be able to look up the names of the cards on the internet while you're listening if you happen to have a device with you. Just do a search for major arcana cards or Rider Waite tarot deck cards or something like that. And you may also want to do a search for the image of the Kabbalistic tree of life. However, you can still listen to this program today without having to do any of that. It's just that having those visual aids, you might find it helpful in your learning about the connection between the faith of Kabbalah, that is the mystical faith of Kabbalah, and the creation of the Rider Waite tarot deck. And also, because it's true, it all relates to our journey of life and our ascension to a higher state. Often, when we talk about a subject related to the spiritual world or the paranormal, or even just the supernatural, we feel as though we're talking about one particular subject. However, the truth is we might be talking about multiple subjects at once. And one of the reasons why I thought this show, Human Ascension with Ellie, would be interesting for me, if not anyone else, but perhaps even for others, just a few of you, is that it gives us an opportunity to be able to look at single subjects in the scope of the bigger picture and whether or not things that don't initially appear to be related actually are very much related indeed. I do tarot readings every day of the year, and I've been working with a certain deck of tarot cards for 35 plus years. My original deck, I've never really had any interest in understanding more than one set of tarot cards. Some tarot readers differ to me. They collect different tarot cards by a wide variety of creators. They may really appreciate the beauty of a particular deck and its imagery, or they might find a certain deck easier to understand. Some tarot decks even have basic definitions written on each card, just in case you need a quick reference guide, a bit like a kind of a cheat sheet in a way. But I'm loyal to a certain tarot deck, which is called the Rider Waite deck. It was illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith in the early 1900s under the commission of Arthur Edward Waite. Both Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Edward Waite were members of a society, kind of a secret society, called the Society of the Golden Dawn. It was a mystical society that operated from the late 1800s and into the early 1900s in Britain. The Golden Dawn had its roots in the Masonic and Kabbalistic principles of physical and spiritual realms. My knowledge of the Rider Waite deck of tarot cards after 35 years of reading tarot has brought me to a point where I'm very, very close, very soon, about to publish my first book, which is a comprehensive instruction on how to read tarot, and in particular, the Rider Waite deck of cards. I have written the book in such a way that I believe as to keep the principles very logically sound, whilst also demonstrating in detail some of the science around the development of the cards and how they draw from mysticism that isn't as mysterious as you might think it is, once you know how to translate it into a practical example, such as the interpretation of tarot cards. By the time a person has read my book, I hope that they will be able to have gone through the process of starting out as a novice with almost zero knowledge, and then progressing into someone who is not only a proficient tarot card reader, but also is a person who appears, whether it's true or not, to have years of experience under their belt, all from one book. And I've been working very hard at this. One thing that becomes very obvious about tarot cards is that whilst they are often described as being a game, game playing card, they are very far from being that at all. They are a language in which a proficient reader can get insight into many of the principles of life and humanity that are often described in ancient wisdoms and faiths. One faith in particular has heavily influenced the creation of the Rider Waite tarot deck, and that is the Kabbalah faith. Kabbalah is a complex mystical branch of Judaism that claims to date back to the Garden of Eden. That's the Garden of Eden that's described in the book of Genesis 2 to 3, I think it is, and Ezekiel 28 in the Bible. So to try and describe Kabbalah in a way that is easily understood means that it needs to be simplified in some way. It really is an incredibly difficult to understand faith. And one of the key principles around Kabbalah is that you can't really understand it from an analytical or scientific or even a philosophical standpoint. You have to feel it inside you, which is a testament to the mystical nature of the faith. This is the reason why Kabbalah often is not taught so much in schools or in books. Instead, its information is passed on from elder to student. And that allows the learner to get a sense of how it feels rather than just what it says or what it's trying to say. And so I might butcher this a little bit, just slightly, because I'm not a Kabbalistic elder or anything. But I'm just going to try to simplify a particular Kabbalistic reference because I hope you'll find it interesting. And the reference I'm referring to is the diagram that you may have seen here and there in esoteric illustrations. And it's called the Tree of Life because it links very closely to tarot. In particular, in today's episode, we're going to look at Kabbalah's Tree of Life, what it stands for, how to understand its principles, and how the Tree of Life links to my favorite deck of tarot cards, but also how the whole thing relates quite closely to the ascension of humanity. Because I was always going to stay on topic. I wasn't going to deviate. So take a moment to get comfortable and settle in, because at the end of this episode, I hope that we will all be just that little bit smarter than we were yesterday. So the Kabbalistic Tree of Life is a diagram of what looks like a kind of a tree, It consists of 10 nodes or spheres and 22 pillars or pathways. The official term for the spheres that you can see on the screen now, if you're watching live, is Sephirot. But today I'm just going to be calling them either nodes or spheres, just so that it's much easier to understand. And I think I'll also be talking about the 22 pillars or pathways as simply the pathways, because quite frankly, that is the benefit that they give to the Tree of Life anyway, and that's the task that they perform. So it'll either be nodes and spheres and pathways, generally. So the Tree of Life represents the universal laws of reality, but it's a universal emanation of the divine principle, actually, because there is no end to the combination of nodes and pathways. And it could be a continuous acting, traveling around, which is taking place in that Tree of Life. Kabbalists believe the Tree of Life to be something that lives and breathes within each and every one of us as individuals, but also in the collective sense. You could, in very simple terms, consider the pathways to travel either upward or downward, and each of the nodes or spheres are kind of way stations where you stop to reflect and build a body of life experiences and the influences that, things that influence your life before you continue your travel either up or down the Tree of Life again. If you're traveling a pathway downward, then you're generally heading towards the physical or the body, or perhaps maybe the unconscious mind. And if you're traveling upward in the tree, then you're following a path towards a more divine source of the soul and our higher selves. The Tree of Life is a kind of blueprint design, and it represents the richness of our inner lives, based on the principle that the spiritual realm is not some abstract principle out there in space. It's something that's within each of us. The 22 pathways that make up the tree of life collectively mean that there is always a connection between multiple nodes or spheres. There is never a disconnection. But one thing that may not be something that's commonly known out there is that those 22 pathways that connect the nodes to each other that appear in the tree of life correspond exactly to the 22 cards in tarot that are known as the Major Arcana Suite in the Rider Waite tarot deck. The 22 Major Arcana cards in the Rider Waite tarot deck are like 22 examples of key pathways that we can follow that help to define us for who we really are. For example, there is a card for relationships called the Lover's card, but it's not just about seeing someone who you think is beautiful and coupling up with them so that you can be in love and get married and have children or, live together and separate in a horrible thing. No, the Lover's card means much more than that. And because it's a Major Arcana card, it also represents important decisions we may have to make in our life or major life lessons that we have to learn. Another example is the Strength card, which is another Major Arcana card in the Rider Waite deck. Strength is about having personal fortitude, being able to tackle life's issues on your own and having the personal strength to do the right thing or take care of yourself without having to rely on someone else to drag you along or make your decisions for you. This is the case for each of the 22 Major Arcana cards in the Rider Waite deck, and so they are each represented by the 22 different pathways that appear in the Kabbalistic tree of life, which also represent the paths that we choose to take or which have been chosen for us that become lessons of life and help to define us during our journey of life. The aim of the game of life is to live in such a way as to gain the best that you can from the experiences that life gives you and to develop every aspect of yourself until you are the best that you can be. Yes, you may end up being a famous athlete, and that means you've learned how to care for your body and cherish the power that it gives you. But that's just one life lesson. And if you are lacking the other 21 lessons, then your life is still a little empty and you have still failed to evolve and reach a higher degree of consciousness or spiritual enlightenment. The Kabbalistic tree of life is a visual depiction of the crazy, unpredictable journey of life for everybody, where every person gets a chance during their life to encounter each life lesson. And the manner in which they travel that pathway determines the direction for the rest of their journey, until finally their life on earth has concluded, and then a stocktake is made of how their journey has unfolded. That stocktake, well, I guess we can call that our life review, which is something that we experience in the afterlife before we begin our next journey into the next phase of our soul's existence. About a year ago, I started an instructional podcast on how to read tarot called Meat and Potatoes Tarot, because it's simple. And the very first episode was an invitation for the listener to pick up the travel notes of a young man who was embarking on a journey of his life for the very first time. That young man was called the Fool because he had no prior experiences of life. He was like a newborn baby with nothing bad or good ever having happened to him before, nothing notable of any kind ever having occurred in his life. And as it happens, the very first card in the Major Arcana suite of the Rider Waite deck is the Fool card, and it's numbered 0, which represents the 0 number of life experiences possessed by the Fool. So in a similar vein, we're going to take a journey today, just like the journey of the Fool from episode 1 of my Meat and Potatoes Tarot podcast. However, we're going to also include the Tree of Life into our discussion so that you can see the practical manner in which mysticism links to the interpretation of a language, such as the language of tarot, which then links to our existence here in the physical sense and our aspiration towards an ascendant spiritual enlightenment. I'm going to warn you, just because a person calls themselves a tarot card reader doesn't mean that they know this stuff. And therefore, you may be able to go out there today after listening to this episode and charge people money to share the very same information with the world. And all I have to say about that is you're welcome, because, I'm sure you're like me, and I love a good freebie. So remember that every time I talk about one of the major arcana cards, I'm talking about one of the 22 pathways that you can see in that image of the Tree of Life. And for those of you who are watching on video, you'll be able to see a diagram of the Tree of Life and the pathways in the corner of the screen. And if you're listening on podcast, it's okay, because you can always go back and Google a diagram of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, or Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. When you see it, you will instantly understand what I mean by the descriptions that I'm giving today. It's just a combination of spheres and pathways, or nodes and pathways. So let's for a moment imagine that we have found a book containing travel notes written by the Fool throughout his journey towards spiritual enlightenment. We decide to retrace the Fool's steps just as he has written, and his experiences just as he has encountered them. For this to be possible, our first requirement is to adopt the Fool's perspective, as it would have been, prior to the commencement of his journey. The Fool and each major arcana card that follows the Fool is numbered. Each number represents a brief consecutive stopover on the Fool's journey between his starting point and his destination. So we begin our Fool's journey with no preconceptions and nothing more than free will, and the Fool's travel notes are used to guide us. So we travel upward for the very first time as the Fool towards one of the nodes. We are infant-like, impressionable, and just like a sponge, we soak up everything we're exposed to. Nothing bad or good has happened to us so far in our lives. We're spontaneous and fearlessly unaware of anything other than our own existence. There will be joys and heartaches, challenges, or challenging situations to navigate. This is all in our future. And for now, we're just eager to embark on our journey. And so we do so by stepping off a cliff into the unknown. We begin at the top of the tree, at the node which is called the crown, because in our innocence, we are closest to God, or our Creator. As we travel downward to the first leg of our journey of life, we begin to become earthbound, and we reach our first new node or sphere, which is called wisdom. Because for the first time, we're learning something new just by embarking on our journey. And that is the principle of having experienced something for the first time, which will allow us to gather even the smallest degree of wisdom. At this point, we meet the Magician, who is the first card following the Fool in the Major Arcana suite. He's numbered number 1. The Magician is active, like the positive end of a magnet. He's masculine and creative. He has a heightened sense of his conscious awareness and embodies a force capable of manifesting material desires. The Magician gets things done, and he teaches us to act and to make use of our ability to impact the world around us. We gather that awareness and we continue on our travels down the Magician's pathway. So as we do so, we reach another node or sphere in our travels, and that is the sphere that's called understanding. We've gathered more awareness, which brings us close to the crown node once again. because the greater the degree of awareness, the higher the state of consciousness, and the closer to the divine we become. We see alternative pathways, and when we follow one, we encounter the High Priestess card from the Major Arcana suite. The High Priestess is the complementary partner to the Magician, and her number is 2 in the Major Arcana suite. She's passive, like the negative end of a magnet, and has a heightened awareness of the principle of an unconscious mind. She teaches us that there is more than just what we see with our eyes. She is the magician's equal, and together they create balance. And so now we're on the pathway of the High Priestess, and we decide to see what else we might have missed, because with our newfound wisdom and understanding, suddenly we know that there is more than we knew before. So we try a third pathway, which relates to the Empress card, which is card number 3 in the Major Arcana suite. And alongside her, we also see the complementary pathway of the Emperor card, which is card number 4 in the Major Arcana suite. The Empress embodies motherhood. She nurtures us and provides us with an awareness of our surroundings. The Empress teaches us that just as we can impact our world, we can also draw from its natural abundance. In a complementary manner, the Emperor card embodies fatherhood and the ability to master the material world and utilize it in ways that promote growth. The Emperor and the Empress are complementary partners, just like the Magician and the High Priestess were. And while the Empress helps to develop our earthly senses, the Emperor represents our first interaction with the concept of limitation. The Emperor teaches us that rules and discipline create a sound basis from which power can thrive. We're given an awareness of the importance of self-regulation and the risks associated with excess. Having encountered the Magician and his partner, the High Priestess, and the Empress and her partner, the Emperor, this has given us many potential pathways to follow throughout the Tree of Life. We can travel towards new and interesting spheres, each representing the embodiment of the human psyche or the individual sense of self. There are a total of 10 spheres or nodes that have become accessible to us. And those 10 spheres correspond with the numbered cards 1 through 10 of the Minor Arcana suite of tarot. We have choices and we'll investigate them all in our journey of life. But to help to reflect on their importance and relevance when it comes to our search for spiritual enlightenment, then we must also travel each of the pathways representing each of the remaining Major Arcana cards. And we will then encounter each of the spheres representing each of the Minor Arcana cards, minus the court cards, which I'll talk about later. Each card will give us a glimpse of the direction of our lives, the direction that it will take as we reflect upon each of these spheres. The remaining spheres are mercy, severity, beauty, victory, splendor, foundation, and then finally, the kingdom. Each sphere links to more than one pathway, which represents the many paths that we can choose in life, or the many pathways that are chosen for us, and which ultimately provide the richness of experience to our journey towards enlightenment. So consider this. If you find yourself, it's kind of a real life example. If you find yourself continually being presented with a certain kind of life challenge and your decisions always take you to the same outcome, then this would be reflected in the Kabbalistic Tree of Life as a journey that takes you around in a circle. You will continue to travel the pathway that takes you to the node representing beauty, for example. But beauty alone does not fulfill your sense of enlightenment. And so you travel the path again, being tested again, and you continue to make the same choices that leave you on the node of beauty. In order to gain an elevated sense of spiritual enlightenment, you must also consider more than one pathway of travel. So, next time you choose to follow a different path, and this time you find yourself at the node of victory or splendor or mercy, regardless of where you find yourself, your consciousness has been expanded, and the challenges repeatedly faced by you that left you in limbo are now potentially overcome. You have therefore ascended, perhaps only slightly, but still, it is progress in your search for the path that leads you to the divine. So, let's carry on. As we continue our journey, we meet the Hierophant card in the Major Arcana suite. The Hierophant introduces us to a defined body of beliefs, traditions, and continuities. The Hierophant teaches us to accept the Emperor's regulation in a manner which is recognizable, repeatable, and reassuring for us and for those around us. So, being part of a group, a brotherhood, a church, a family, something of that nature, a government. We depart our encounter with the Hierophant having begun a process of maturity beyond that of the childlike traveller that we were when we were merely the fool. So far, we've discovered our creativity and intuitive senses. We're beginning to understand that being among others can exist in parallel with our own unique sense of identity, and that rules and structure provide safety. With the development of our early maturity and a growing awareness of our senses emerges a desire to connect with others. We have seen from the magician and the high priestess, plus, of course, the empress and the emperor, that partnership with others can create a harmony of coexistence. We learn in our stop at the Lover's card, which comes next in the Major Arcana suite, that relationships and intimacy create a blended impact on us and those that we engage with. We learn that having consideration of what is practical is important, and that when a person ceases to travel alone, they not only enjoy the company of others, but may also share in the other's burden. Our lesson at this stop is to consider all that we are so far and to choose our partnerships with consideration of the consequences to follow. When you choose a partner, whether in work or in friendship or in love, you're choosing to help to carry the severity of their burden. You notice that I've chosen the word severity for a reason, and to share in the responsibilities and benefits of their interactions in their own life's journey. And for this reason, by the time we've reached the lover's pathway, we have accumulated the sense of self related to not only wisdom and understanding, but also mercy, severity, and beauty. We have almost reached adulthood when our journey takes us to the Chariot card in the Major Arcana suite. What remains of our youthfulness is our arrogant unawareness of just how different the journey may have been so far for others who are also on a journey just like our own journey. By respecting the similarity and diversity of others, we can gain agreement on how to move forward in all our respective journeys. So far, the road we've traveled is smooth. Should we encounter challenges later in our journey, our ability to gain the trust of others and to negotiate positive outcomes with people who are different from us, well, this will aid us in our safe passage as we continue on with this journey of enlightenment. We decide to take what might seem like an interesting pathway from the node of or the sphere of severity down along the path of the Major Arcana card of strength towards the node of beauty. What makes the pathway interesting is that we learn to recognize and appreciate the value of living in a virtuous life. Self-reliance and personal fortitude are virtues of strength that we cannot borrow from others and must each learn ourselves. As we advance forward, the journey becomes littered with obstacles and complications. And each of these is a test of our strength. And to continue between each obstacle or beyond each obstacle, we must note our anguish, but also find ways to press on regardless. The lessons of strength include self adjustment and tolerance and perseverance. By learning to overcome setbacks and challenges, we emerge from this encounter having become adults. And so, yes, we're developing our earthly senses and our inner senses of identity and how we fit into the material world. We progress on our journey as adults who have an expanded view of the material world. There is much to reflect upon, and the maturity of our minds is proven by the questions about life that begin to emerge. We travel the pathway of the Hermit card in the Major Arcana suite to consider all that we have encountered so far and how the experiences have given us knowledge, but also leave us with a complexity of unanswered questions. What is the purpose of this journey? What is the purpose of our lives? Questioning based on the things that we've learned, it opens our minds. As we reflect upon what we know and question what we don't know, there is more ahead for us on this pathway, but this is the final stopover in the material space, and we're only halfway through the Fool's Travel Notes. To continue forward, we must recognize and adopt the virtue of prudent deliberation of that which exists so that we may gather wisdom from our experiences. At this point in our journey, we have focused on the outer material domain where the manifestation of earthly desires and the influence over the world around us are dominant aspects of life. We've reflected, as the hermit does, and asked questions about the complexities of life. But now we're entering the pathway of the Wheel of Fortune, which is the Major Arcana card, which is a constantly revolving propellant of our fate. And it takes in everything that we've encountered, all that we've learned, and it combines it into a directional force that will determine how next to proceed on our journey. The Wheel of Fortune teaches us that our destiny is comprised of one part circumstance and one part free will. How we have journeyed so far will determine our direction moving forward. Our journey so far has given us the adult perspective that is born from living through experiences, good and bad, that shape who we've become in the material or earthly sense. Just as an international airline passenger eventually must report to customs, so now is the time for us to appear before justice. And that is the Justice card in the Major Arcana suite. We continue our journey by choosing to follow the pathway of justice, represented, of course, by that Major Arcana suite. The justice pathway takes us between the node or the sphere of severity and mercy. You can see from this example that we're about to be measured and weighed to see how we've performed in life so far or so far in our journey. We either could be judged severely, which is the severity node or sphere, or with mercy, which is represented by the mercy sphere. Throughout our travels, we've collected the souvenirs of all that we are. We must declare everything in our possession for inspection before we can pass, and we must face the consequences of all that we have left in our wake. Have we caused other people to suffer? Have we absorbed the two essential virtues presented to us by strength and the Hermit Major Arcana cards? Will we absorb the virtue of clear-eyed and fair evaluation of ourselves before we depart the material world and embark on the spiritual leg of our journey? Having a clear-eyed awareness of ourselves may leave us feeling as though the journey so far has been severe towards us. We therefore choose to follow the pathway of the Hanged Man in the Major Arcana suite. With everything we learned as we progressed through the material leg of our journey, it was the encounter with justice that put it in full perspective. Our material existence was turned upside down, and so now we must hang in suspension as we await the next leg of our journey. Our entire collection of souvenir teachings from our travels so far was handed over for inspection. All that remains is our free will, and there is only one decision left to make before we move forward from the hanged man pathway, and that is the decision to surrender to our fate. The lesson that takes us forward from materialism and into a spiritual realm is to know that by being fair and contributing ourselves supportively to those around us, we open the door for the world to reciprocate in kind. Knowing this provides us serenity and an acceptance of what's to come. What comes is the sphere of splendor when we surrender. On the hanged man path. It is now time for us to conclude our journey through the material existence and embark on that splendid spiritual journey that takes us beyond identity, desire, acquisition, respect, and the tangible elements of earth. Letting go of the material constraints of our lives does indeed leave us with a feeling of splendor. And so we continue. Despite its variety of lessons and challenges, the first leg of our journey allowed us to indulge our desire for material comfort. However, the second leg of our journey requires that we travel light, and for this, we are required to report to the baggage counter. Just as a space rocket begins to peel away following takeoff to remain light enough to ascend beyond the Earth's atmosphere, so must we relinquish our unnecessary earthly load at the baggage counter. Material burdens, longings, and possessions are no longer of any value to us and have been forgotten. Elements of our past will be left behind so that we may continue forward with abundant intention. We're traveling the pathway of death in the major arcana suite, and that's why we are losing everything from our material existence. Death is not something to be feared. For those of us who have only lived a material life, death is a terrifying prospect. For those of us who know more, however, death is a release of our material encumbrances so that we may lightly float away towards the sphere of victory. All that was once a familiar comfort will be foregone in our quest for spiritual enlightenment. So let's take stock of what we've done so far. We began with our free will, just the full, which at first was unconstrained. As our journey progressed forward, we began to encounter deliberation turnpikes, obstacles, and challenges that tested and taught us to consider our virtues. The fourth and final lesson of virtue is that which we encounter as we travel down the pathway of the temperance card in the major arcana suite. The highs and lows we've encountered will have taught us that moderation, balance, and the considered restraint of our primal impulses will enable us to get the remainder of our journey right. The biggest and most challenging tests are yet to come. Learning to acknowledge our heart, but lead with our conscious mind will give us the tools needed to navigate the remainder of our journey. If the journey of life, as depicted by the Tree of Life and the Major Arcana Suite of Tarot, was an easy journey to take, then we would have learnt from our encounter with temperance and would now easily be at the sphere that directly precedes our intended destination. And that is the sphere of foundation, which is where we land as a testament to having earned everything we need to become spiritually fulfilled and at one with our Creator. However, it's never that easy, and the toughest of obstacles will hamper our efforts. We have come a long way since we first began to trace the steps of the Fool. We've discovered our conscious and unconscious powers to manifest desires and impact the world around us. We've learnt to coexist with others, recognize their sameness, and respect their differences and diversity. We have demonstrated courage, self-reflection, fairness, and moderation. We're feeling pretty good about ourselves as we continue our journey, enjoying the peace and serenity that we acquired through our encounter with temperance. At that precise moment, we forget that we are still on a path that requires continuous vigilance. And that is the pathway of the devil. That is the devil in the major arcana suite, where the temptation nodes of beauty and splendor are ever present. We let our guard down for a moment, and as we do, the devil unexpectedly confronts us. The devil looms like an imposing giant, casting a black shadow around us that obscures the pathway that continues our journey. He evokes negative forces such as hopelessness and temptation, which reside within each of us all of the time. Constant vigilance keeps the forces dormant, but moments of complacency can allow them to rise within us and obstruct our view of the light from our destination, which is the sun. The devil feeds on toxic people, materialistic excess, and our enslavement to habits that may take us off our path towards spiritual fulfillment. The way in which to pass beyond the devil is to deny him and instead to focus on remembering each of the lessons we've already learned from the fool's journey so far. Without sustenance, the devil begins to wither, exposing a splinter of light in the distance. And so we rush towards it, and now we're free. There is a devastating change in our journey. We're breathlessly advancing along the path of the Tower. That's the Tower card in the Major Arcana suite. And as we do, the path beneath our feet seems to vanish. We're suddenly catapulted aimlessly into the air, and our sense of direction evaporates. We don't know where up is or where down is, and the moment feels very uncertain, like a catastrophe is upon us, but we're not even sure if we can be certain of that. There is nothing that we can do about this, and so we do nothing. We allow ourselves to let go completely and become wholeheartedly committed to our fate. By releasing ourselves from the egotistical pursuit of believing that we have the power to control everything, we experience a revelation. We are each an aspect of something greater, and there is more than what we know, and far more than we can control. We arrive again with a stumble to the victory node, except this time we arrive with more life experiences, and we recognize victory as being more complex and potentially rewarding than it was before. We step forward onto the pathway of the Star card in the Major Arcana suite, which is the card of hope and second chances. So you see, despite our vivid memory of all that we've encountered and the chaos that we encountered, we emerge from troubling times and can see the positivity that awaits us beyond any challenges we could face. We're hopeful and believe that every stopover we experienced, even those which presented obstacles to overcome, well, they were merely the prelude to another chance to complete our journey. The Star card in the Major Arcana suite, and therefore the Star pathway, shows us that peace and optimism are always within reach. We continue on our journey and can see our final destination up ahead. Our intention is to enter the divine space so that we may sit with our Creator. But we're on the pathway of the Moon card in the Major Arcana suite. We're getting closer though. And as we do get closer, the moon also appears in the sky and begins to eclipse the sun. For a moment, we become disorientated by the denial of sunlight to illuminate the sky. We feel lost and have no idea where we are or how to move forward. We acknowledge that we feel anxiety because we're not certain and we have no physical proof of what we know. But then we realize that it really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that we know. And so we continue. The moon teaches us that unlike the Tower, which is a single calamity that comes and then goes, our journey through life will also present a series of ongoing deceptions, illusions, and attempted exploitations. We are the fool, and to protect ourselves from vulnerability, we must remember and practice each of the lessons we've learned from our journey in the way that they may appear throughout our lives, because they may appear in any order, not just consecutively like today's episode. Finally, we have a clear and lighted pathway, the pathway of the Sun card in the Major Arcana suite. We're greeted by the Sun. In the instance that we see his smiling face, the long and winding path that it took to arrive at our destination seems like an effortless expedition instantly. We are revitalized, content, and blessed. Both the Sun and the Star cards in the Major Arcana suite have shown us the true examples of what it means to appear on the sphere or the node of splendor. There is always the superficial splendor of temptation, such as what is offered by the devil. That type of splendor may be great material fortune or popularity or addicting vice that distracts us from true splendor and what that feels like in life. The true splendor is one of gathered enlightenment and spiritual accomplishment. And so we arrive again at the node of splendor or the sphere of splendor, simply to step upon the last few paths to which we will travel without prevention. We have completed our journey, which was to the Sun card in the Major Arcana suite, but we must now take measurement of all that we've become in the process. The good and the bad have revealed a method of discovery of ourselves, the material world in which we live, and the spiritual world that makes it possible. Our ego is dissolved and taken over by forgiveness, and we are reborn. The pathway of the world card in the Major Arcana suite, which is the final card in the Major Arcana suite, is somewhat of a formality. It acts like a portal from one journey to another. And so we step onto the pathway of the world, which takes us directly to our divine existence in the node or sphere called kingdom. And that is where we can sit with our Creator as we await our reassignment to a brand new journey in a brand new life. So, when you are reflecting upon the Kabbalistic tree of life and the way in which tarot has incorporated the divine principles of the reality of life into a language that can bring to the surface messages that prove to be surprisingly profound, well, you're able to see for yourself that all it takes is the quietness of mind to be able to communicate with a mystical world that would otherwise seem to be impenetrable. I have used tarot cards to reach deep inside a human being, far deeper than the single relationship issue they came to me with to be consulted with, or the answer to why they can't find a job or can't lose weight or can't seem to find a way to communicate effectively with their son or their daughter or their boss or their parent or even their next door neighbor. To some people, tarot is a magic trick used by hokey pokey people who call themselves psychics so that they don't have to get a real job. And yes, this is true in some cases. There are plenty of charlatans out there who will tell a person who comes for a tarot card reading anything they think will work with that person. But there are also those who do have a gift, and the gift may take any form. I'm not qualified to judge who is and who isn't genuine. I only focus on myself, and I would never call myself a psychic, never. I'm just an ordinary person who happens to speak more than one language. I speak English, I guess, reasonably well, I suppose, and then I also speak the language of tarot. And what I believe is that there is someone, or perhaps even several someones, out there residing in the ether who also speak the language of tarot that I speak. And so we communicate using the tarot cards as the tool by which we can understand the message. What the Kabbalistic tree of life shows me is that this is a communication that comes from a reality that precedes the current age and the previous age and the previous age before that, and even the age before that. If the Bible is the guide that we're using, then since the creation of the earth, there has been another unearthly presence who resides somewhere in the proximity of the divine creator. And they have, from the very first instance, which the Kabbalah faith claims to be right at the beginning of man in the Garden of Eden, well, they've created a set of divine principles for the manner in which life would unfold, following an endless series of pathways to points of reflection and the building of our body of self until we become the final versions of who we are in this life. And that is represented by the major and the minor arcana suite of tarot. We then would be judged, perhaps in the way that a life review takes place after our life here on the material plane, but nonetheless, a review of our material life exists, and then a review of our spiritual self exists. And then for a mere moment, we rest with our Creator, perhaps over a cup of tea or a cocktail, and then we prepare to begin the journey again. With every journey that we take of life, there is a remnant of our previous journey that has been embedded into our spirit, so that each time we're reborn, we return with the chance to rise to a slightly higher level of existence, the goal of which is to one day ascend to a higher state entirely, perhaps a state that no longer even needs a physical body. And of course, in the past, there was a small group of practitioners in London in the late 18th century who realized that the realities of life here on Earth and beyond could be expressed with their own language. And so they worked together to create a beautiful set of language cards called tarot cards, so that people like me, and perhaps even some of you, can communicate with the spirits that were once there in the Garden of Eden and over the many ages for humanity that have come and gone since then, and have developed an understanding of us, humanity, that is far deeper than we even know ourselves. I say it all the time, and that is that I love the Rider Waite tarot cards. I just love the cards, and the cards are always listening. If you would like to get to know more of what I do when I'm not here talking to you, then visit me at Ellie Dreams and Under on YouTube. I have a variety of playlists of tarot card readings that cover a wide spectrum of topics, including personal readings that demonstrate the complexity of life and how one person's questions can end up answering the questions of many. Thank you to everyone who's watching today on one of KGRA's many broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to become a member of the KGRA community and family of viewers so that you can chat live with like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists, and weirdos like me, watch any of the shows on KGRA, then don't forget to mention promo code Ellie to get 30% off your subscription. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.